An old hand chicken.
I put it right there. It's like right there, ready for you. I was preempted. I like this over there.
I think you also it's like but it's only I did something. That's what I
wore my wig right here. We are swag rubbing.
No, my
Right, and then I wanted to.
they might have
I'm sorry.
We need one of the days. We need one. The kids' parents. Not yet. So you don't worry about that.
that's where the
I was thinking they won't read the possibilities of this. So the question is, what was the rest of it? I tried
Yeah, sorry.
It probably was a call.
Yeah, that's fine. We can put them in the room.
I'll have to think.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Kevin Gilbert, Chair of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. And we're gonna go ahead and get our July 7th meeting started. We have a very packed agenda, including a closed session. The good thing is it's a lot of informational things, so we're gonna try and get through some of the informational things quickly, because there are a couple items that I'm sure we're gonna have a lot of conversation on. But it looks like we're starting at 7:10 p.m. We are live streaming the meeting, so we ask that commissioners speak up so those participating electronically and listening through YouTube can clearly hear what is being said. Tonight, I believe we have 4 commissioners participating electronically. We have Acting Director Jennifer DeBrule, who is a NVTC alternate, participating electronically under the provision of our electronic participation policy that allows a member to participate electronically if they live 60 more miles away from meeting location. She attended a I-81 Advisory Committee meeting in Roanoke, which I think counts as more than 60 miles, and is hopefully driving safely along the corridor. We also have Ms. Bagley, who is on work travel, participating remotely from Ohio. We have Ms. Amy Gilroy, who's participating virtually as well due to medical reasons, California. And lastly, we have Ms. Palchek, who is participating virtually as well due to medical reasons, and she is here locally in Fairfax County. And one other note, Mr. Stewart, welcome, is here for Mr. McKay as his alternate. We also have confirmed that we have quorum, so I believe that we can get started. And have we received any public comment?
We have not received any public comments this evening.
Okay, no public comment. Excellent. Moving on to our next item, the minutes from our previous meeting on June 2nd. Any comments, amendments, concerns?
Move approval?
I was going to ask for that next. Motion from Ms. Garvey, second from Ms. Crystal. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say by aye.
Aye.
I saw a hand from Ms. Gilroy, aye from Ms. Bagley,
Aye.
aye from Ms. Palchek. Those are 3 online.
Mr. Chairman, I'm abstaining.
Abstention from Mr. Skiles. Any
Mr.
other
Chairman, I'm
abstentions?
going to abstain since I wasn't meeting.
Senator Bell, abstention as well. And one last abstention.
The water's warm.
Yeah, it's always better when there's a couple other to go with you, right?
Y'all maybe jump in first.
Okay, so we have 3 items on our consent agenda. So 3A is to approve the contract award for the Envision Route 7 strategic framework. We also have 3B, which is the approval of the application and acquisition of procurement cards, which yay, finally having procurement cards for our NVTC staff. And 3C, which is to authorize our executive director to extend the contract for our government relations. Any comments or concerns? Otherwise, a motion?
Approval?
Second.
Approval from, motion from Ms. Garvey, second from Mr. Snyder. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Ms. Bagley, hand from Ms. Palchek, and from Ms. Gilroy. Thank you. Looks like, any abstentions? All right. Looks like it is unanimous. Moving on to item number 4, approval of the revised NVTC electronic participation policy, which goes into effect September 1st of this year. There are Virginia code changes to the Freedom of Information Act going into effect September 1st, which are a result of action in the 2022 General Assembly. Therefore, we need to update our NVTC electronic participation policy. And Ms. Mattice, would you mind giving us an overview?
Happy to do so. So I definitely would like to direct commissioners to the red line version of our electronic participation policy that's in the meeting materials. The most substantive change is that NVTC will be able to conduct all virtual meetings starting September 1st. There are limits. So the commission and each of its committees and subcommittees can hold all virtual meetings for 2 times per calendar year or 25% of the meetings held during a calendar year, rounding up to the next one, whichever is greater. The all virtual meetings can't be in consecutive months. So for example, you can't have a January and then a February. You could have a January, February in person and a March all virtual. And since there is a limited time that the commission and committees and subcommittees can do this, we do plan on being strategic and working through where are some opportunities for these types of meetings. For example, if we find ourselves with a commission meeting, especially because we're the first Thursday of the month, there are some years where that might be very close to New Year's or very close to 4th of July or things like that. So as we look to next calendar year, we will be coming back and having a conversation first with the executive committee and then also with the full commission about what the calendar is looking like. We also do not necessarily need to do this in advance as long as we have 72 hours. And so that's something to think about, but that's something we have an opportunity, especially for the committees. I think that provides a lot more flexibility. Those can be very difficult to schedule. So again, to have some flexibility to do all virtual meetings, again, most instances would be no more than 2 a year. Really, there's a rounding, and potentially could be 3 full commission meetings, depending on the numbers. And so just as a reminder, so several existing guidelines that are already included in the participation policy that are worthy of note. When we do have the opportunity for commissioners like we do tonight, participating electronically, we still do need to have a physical quorum here in the building. And electronic participation by an individual commissioner for a personal matter is still limited to 2 meetings of the public body per calendar year, or 25% of meetings, whichever is greater. And then electronic participation for an individual commissioner for medical reasons are still unlimited. And these are separate and apart from, of course, if we do an all virtual meeting for whole commission, those numbers, those 2 are separate and apart from that. And so folks have been really, really good about it. But again, a reminder, you do need to notify the chair and me and Rhonda at least 8 hours ahead of the meeting to let us know the reason why you need to participate remotely, whether it's personal, medical, or actually if you live more than 60 miles away from the meeting location. If it's for personal reason, we do need to know the nature of the personal reasons such as if it's personal or business travel or work conflict, basic generalities. For medical reason, we just need to know if it's for yourself or if it's for caring for another person. And the other thing that we do need to know, and you heard a little bit about that from our chair this evening, we do need to go to the general location where you're remotely participating, such as the jurisdiction, state, or country if you're traveling. And again, just a reminder, do send to the chair and Rhonda and me so that we're able to document it. That's something that we need to have paperwork for. And that is basically the highlights of the changes.
So it's nice to have the flexibility. We could use it if we want to, but we don't have to if we don't want to. So it's kind of there as needed. Any questions, concerns about the new policies? Motion by Mr. DeFrenti, is there a second?
Second.
Second from Senator Bell. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
And I see 3 hands virtually from Ms. Gilroy, Ms. Palchik, and Ms. Beck. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Looks like we're moving on now to item number 5, which is WMATA. And we're going to start with a Yellow Line Bridge / tunnel and Potomac Yard related Metro Rail shutdown update and presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Mr. Potts and Ms. Zach Williams in a second. They're going to brief us on regional mitigation efforts. And after Renetta gives her update, we'll open it up to questions from the commission. And before we get to other items.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. And again, I'm Greg Potts from Metro. It's good to see everybody. And I'm also joined on Zoom. The screen there is Peter Caffiero. He is the Managing Director of Intermodal Planning. So he's joining. I'm going to kind of kick it off. I'm going to do sort of overview on the setup, and then Peter's going to go through all the service. I did put in your packet right here. Got some info. Here's like a 2-pager, and it's basically everything on the slides in a more condensed format. So that's going to go on the website as well. So kicking it off, first slide. I think everybody's pretty familiar with what's going on with this. We did announce back on March the 8th, some major work that's happening in the fall. 2 of the major pieces of work are on the screen here. One is on the Potomac Yard Station. It's going to be a 6-week shutdown that's happening. All stations south of National Airport are going to be closed. And then of course on the yellow line, both the tunnel and the bridge from September the 10th into May of next year, basically going to be no rail service over the river. So between Pentagon and the Lafayette Plaza Station, no service for that. Next slide. So just a little bit of info on what's going on Potomac Yard Station. This was long planned, so it's been something that's of course necessary to get Potomac Yard up and running. The engineering term is called the cutover, but it basically means sort of connecting the new station to the system. And so that's happening. A lot of things have to take place during that period. And so you can see, what's going on. I mentioned that 6 stations south of the airport are going to be closed. And then there's some reasons here for why. There's engineering requirements that have to happen, safety testing, MSCF to get involved in this, and also operationally. So that's what's going on here at the 6-week period. Next slide. And then this is the more lengthy one. It's good to see a picture. You can see the picture here that's going on in the tunnel. And you can see it's in a pretty bad state of repair there. There is steel lines next to the tunnel. It's the original construction. So from the very beginning, it needs to get repaired. Just to give an example, the work involves welding around 1,200 steel plates. So that just gives you an idea of the scope of work there. And it's going to last around 8 months. There's going to be a continuous shutdown from September the 10th into May of next year. And obviously, this has got a big impact on all of our customers in the region, but it's important work to do. And we thank everyone for their patience as we get the work done. So that was the setup. And then on the next slide, gets into the service, and I'm going to have Peter take over from here.
Thank you, Greg. And I appreciate being able to do this remotely. I guess with your terminology, I'm having to do this for medical reasons, having tested positive a few days ago. So do appreciate the ability to do it this way. So on the right, we have a revised Metro Rail map showing the service plan that would be in effect for the first 6 weeks, the phase that involves both the shutdown of the yellow line and the shutdown south of National Airport. So on the rail side, this will involve essentially running a blue line service from Reagan National Airport out through the blue line with the orange and silver. We will be running twice the level of blue line service, so the equivalent of the blue plus yellow via that route, which is why the regular blue line will go out to Largo and the additional service will operate to New Carrollton because there isn't enough track capacity at Largo terminal to handle the extra blues plus the silver line. Also during this period and continuing actually through the entire yellow line project, because there's no yellow line from L'Enfant to Greenbelt, we will have added green line service as well. South of Reagan National Airport, there will be buses that I'll talk about in the next slide, but just in terms of this, the rail service, basically all of the blue, orange, silver, and the alternate blue will be every 15 minutes. So combined every 7 to 9 minutes or so from National up to and through Arlington and Roslyn and into the district. Replacing buses, replacing service south of National Airport. There are a number of buses that will be very familiar to those of you who were here in 2019 when we had the south of National shutdown. Some minor changes to adjust for different street circumstances that have happened since then. And then some additional buses that we're going to operate, particularly during peak hours for because the Yellow Line bridge is not in service. I also should mention that the Blue Line, of course, connects all the stations. So you will be able to get from Pentagon to L'Enfant, but it is a longer way around for depending on where you're going. So if you're going to L'Enfant, sort of the worst case scenario, it's about 15 minutes longer. If you are going to a place like Foggy Bottom or Farragut, it may be actually a bit shorter or the same travel time because there'll be more frequent service and it's not quite as indirect compared to today's routings. In terms of the bus service, we are going to operate 7 days a week for most of the day, express service from Franconia and from Huntington into Pentagon Transit Center. Those were very popular in 2019, particularly on the Blue Line from Franconia. It's actually probably a little faster directly up the highway into Pentagon. The Yellow Line Express from Huntington will also take highways. It's a little less direct, but again, pretty high speed operation usually. And so it's a pretty direct route up to Pentagon. These will be free shuttle buses, at least as frequent as the rail service, but we'll add additional capacity depending on ridership levels. There will be 2 local routes as well, again, similar to 2019. Blue Line route from Franconia to Van Dorn to King Street, Braddock, and then into Reagan National Airport. And the Yellow Line route from Huntington to Eisenhower to King, Braddock, and then straight to Crystal City. There isn't enough capacity in the National Airport roadway to handle all the additional bus service, and that split operation worked pretty well last time, getting people to where they needed to go. With easy transfers between the 2 routes at King Street and Braddock if you need to transfer between those routes. And then, as I mentioned, there's going to be 3 weekday rush hour only, rush period only shuttle services. Again, all these as free shuttles that are new for since 2019 because these are really to address the Yellow Line not operating between Pentagon and L'Enfant. So we'll operate shuttle number 1 from Crystal City to L'Enfant Plaza. There's a number of construction projects at Pentagon itself that's constraining that highway system. So we wanted some of that extra bus service to not go into the Pentagon. Shuttle number 2 will connect Pentagon for people coming in on buses into Pentagon, across the river and up to the archives station. And shuttle number 3 is a free shuttle that will follow the route of the old 11Y bus from Mount Vernon up through Arlington, Alexandria, and then across and into the district ending in Potomac Park. So the same route the old 11Y used to operate. Next slide. So once we complete the first 6 week of the service, the most disruptive part, we will restore service south of National Airport. In this map, we show us skipping the new Potomac Yard Station because initially there's still some finishing work to be done after the tie-over is complete, but once we're allowed to operate trains through the station, at some point fairly soon during this period that goes to May, we will begin stopping at that station. But during that period, the Blue Line trains, which again is twice the frequency of the regular Blue Line, will be extended to both Franconia and to Huntington. So you could think of this as the regular blue running from Franconia to Largo, and then a yellow line, but using the blue color going from Huntington to New Carrollton via the blue. During this period from October to May, we will no longer, of course, operate the shuttle buses from Pentagon and National Airport in Crystal City south towards the terminals because the rail is running. But we will continue to operate the three shuttle 1, 2, and 3 shown here from Crystal City to LaFont, from Pentagon to Archives, and from Mount Vernon to Potomac Park on the 11Y route during weekday rush hours. So those will continue for the duration of the Yellow Line project to May of 23. Next.
And that one is me. So this is on sort of regional coordination. This has been taking place quite a bit. We had our first meeting with the region, I believe, last March, and that's been ongoing. We have monthly meetings. Thanks to NVTC for helping with all the coordination on that. I really appreciate it. And there's also been service level meetings, getting down in the weeds on all the service planning. We've also had meetings with the regional PIOs on the comm side to keep them updated on what's happening and to also see if they can assist in spreading the word, sharing the message, all that. So there was a good model set in 2019 for the platform project, and we're sort of just continuing that. Next slide. Here just a little bit on the communication side. We do have a contract that's helping out with this. We did hit already the first marker, so that's June the 15th. We have the website out. There was a big press release that went out. All the service alternatives are out, as Peter was going over. And now into July, we're going to get into more of the outreach, all the stakeholder coordination, HOAs, business outreach, all that. And then when we get into August, it's going to be a lot closer. So it's going to be all the reminders. We're going to do some paid media, some digital. And then when we get really close in the 2 weeks before timeframe, we're going to do some in-person outreach out to the stations. There's street teams, they call them, which is similar to 2019 platform project, where there's folks out there and like the yellow vest type folks. And then it's going to continue during the shutdown itself. We'll do updates. There's going to be blog posts, website updates. So doing our best to keep the region updated, and then also working with the jurisdiction so they can share the message and sort of help us out if possible. That was it, I think. Last slide. There's one more. Yeah, so that's the website. Sort of the tag here is major construction because Yellow Line, tunnel, bridge, Potomac Yard is a mouthful. So it's just called major construction. And you can go on the website and you can sign up to receive updates on there as well. So that was it. And we're happy to answer any questions. And I think NVTC had some slides as well.
Yes. Next slide, please. All right, so shifting over to the NVTC side, our role in this was to handle regional coordination and planning with Virginia stakeholders. So that meant reaching out to transit operators, jurisdictional staff, DRPT, as well as other stakeholders to plan out how we can support Metro in these efforts. So in addition to Metro's travel alternatives, NVTC has highlighted Northern Virginia service that is available during this period, and that's also highlighted on Metro's website as well. So Dash, Fairfax Connector, as well as OmniRide provides existing service to get commuters from the shutdown area up to Pentagon, into DC, or both, as well as the already highlighting service from the Franconia, or providing access from the Franconia Springfield Station and the Alexandria Station up to LaFont Plaza and Union Station. Next slide, please. So based on the approval that the commission granted at the June meeting, NVTC will seek a DRPT grant with a local match to execute a return to ridership marketing campaign. And that will be complementary with Metro's marketing efforts as well once the shutdown is complete. And that grant process is expected to open this month. So we will seek proposals for different media channels, so including video and audio streaming, email blasts, as well as social media ads, to get the word out there and let people know they can return to Metro service. So similar to our current marketing campaign, we plan for this campaign to include both English and Spanish versions, as well as highlighting our novarides.org website as a one-stop shop for transit trip planning. That concludes our presentation, Mr. Chair, so we're happy to answer any questions at this time.
Great. Before I open it up, just want to make a quick comment. I really love the street teams. It's gonna be as much advertising as we're gonna do. Someone's not gonna get the message. They're gonna be buried in a hole for, the next 3 months and pop out and say what's happening. So very useful to have them. But questions, comments, Mr. Skiles?
And Greg, you may or may not be the best person to ask, but in terms of the projects, I'm assuming most of those contracts have been awarded because they're moving forward. But obviously, inflation, labor shortages have had a pretty big impact on construction projects across the country. Are you seeing any changes in terms of what you're expecting for costs of these projects? Are they still within budget?
Yeah, that's something that I could check on with the project managers. They haven't, at least in my calculations, I haven't been alerted to anything, substantive, but I can certainly check up with them to see what they're seeing.
Just true.
Yeah.
We have a question real fast from online from Ms. Gilroy. Just curious why in-station signage would only go up 2 weeks before the change? Seems like it would be more helpful to be up in the early August phase.
Sure, so I can speak with the communications folks on that. I know it does say that here. That's something that we can look at to see if we can get that up a little earlier, if that'd be helpful. Sometimes people don't really pay attention to the last minute, but yeah, earlier the better for sure. So I think I can pass that along.
Mr. Alcorn and then Mr. Bell.
Thank you. Greg, just remind us, where's the money coming from for the, particularly the Yellow Line Tunnel Bridge project?
It's from dedicated funding, so that's an important source. I should have mentioned that. So dedicated funding for sure is making this possible. So thanks to the region for that. Absolutely.
Thank you.
The extra commute time between Pentagon and LaFont, is that at peak time all the time, or how did you test that?
I think Peter might be able to answer.
Yeah, so that's again, that 15 minutes was just comparing rail from station to station, which is pretty consistent peak or off peak. And that's again sort of the worst case scenario if you're going between those stations or further to the east on the orange, blue, silver, or further north on the yellow, green. If you're going to a station before that or transferring at Roslyn to go out west into Virginia or transferring to the red, it's probably going to be less to varying degrees, less. In some cases, it may be actually, if you factor in wait time, it may be a little shorter. So we're just presenting sort of the worst case scenario there. That's just comparing rail to rail. The bus, if my personal feeling is it probably doesn't make sense for someone to get off the train and go upstairs to get a bus over. You'll lose more time doing that than you'll save. The bus primarily is for people who are coming in on bus into Pentagon or coming in from Alexandria and Mount Vernon farther east. It will be faster than taking the bus up to the blue and going around. But it will probably still be slower than the trip today. There's particularly the bus routes that have to go through Old Town Alexandria. It's hard to be as fast as the train is, frankly. Coming up on the highway on the bus lanes from Franconia to Pentagon, it may be a little faster than the train. So it depends really on the market.
Mr. Chairman, quick follow-up. Thank you for the comment. I appreciate the fact you mentioned worst case scenario, which I think is good. But just to make sure that in our marketing and communications, we communicate that, because I know many people are picking up children, they get fines for every minute they're late. I think we need to make this really clear to people that this delay is going to be real. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Ms. Crystal.
Co-sign on that comment. Thank you, Senator Bell. I really appreciate both the presentation and the update here. I want to say I'm particularly pleased that WMATA been able to provide additional blue line service. I think that's going to make a big difference, exactly as just noted, because I don't think people are going to switch from rail to bus. I do remain frustrated at the timing as people are coming back to work. And I think one of the things I'm interested to know, data on ridership and commuting habits has become our lifeblood as we're trying to plan for the future of transit. How is WMATA thinking about capturing data on return to ridership during this unusual time. Do you have a plan for sort of how you'll understand or get a beat on what alternatives people are choosing? Or are we sort of just gonna have a black hole in our data for these months from September through May about ridership patterns?
Peter, do you want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, we would certainly appreciate working with you, and if you have thoughts and ideas, love to hear that. I know that what we did in 2019 and what we've done since then with all the platform improvement projects where we've shut down and replaced with buses, we do track the ridership on the buses.
Okay.
We track ridership on adjacent rail stations and see where people have tried to see where, as best we can, where shifts have happened. Of course, in the middle of all that, COVID happened, and it's hard to suss out the differences, you know, because there's multiple things happening at once, obviously. And I think we do also need to, because I'm very happy that last slide talked about some of the other alternatives that are not Metro. I think some of them, particularly VRE, can be a really good alternative here because it hits multiple spots that our yellow line normally serves but won't be serving. So really we need to share back and forth whatever information we're getting on our ridership on our systems and then try to figure out globally how everybody shifted out.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I don't know if this is relevant or not, but I'll ask it since it's kind of in my backyard. Silver Line is going to be coming online right in the middle of this. And is there some unintended consequence we haven't anticipated with the Silver Line suddenly dumping that volume into the middle of this temporary stopgap operation?
I didn't hear the end of the sentence. Will it be a problem for the Silver Line to be opened out to Ashburn while this is happening? Is that basically the question?
That's it, yeah.
No, we don't. We certainly anticipate that happening and have planned that in. It's a bit of a inside transit kind of scheduling challenge to make all these changes and figure out exactly how they all fit together. So we're certainly very much thinking about it. But the Silver Line extension is essentially taking the existing Silver Line and operating it further down the line. So we've preserved the slots essentially for the Silver all the way out to Largo. A question that has been asked at other meetings I've presented is concern about the capacity of the Orange Blue Silver to handle this extra blue service. That's something we've also spent a lot of time thinking through and making sure that combine the four services, essentially the two blues, silver and orange, are really not exceeding the levels of service that we have historically run through that tunnel. And so we are pretty confident that we will be able to operate those services. And as I pointed out, that's one of the reasons that the additional blue service is going to New Carrollton so that we don't interfere with the Silver Line terminal at Largo.
That's good. Thank you very much.
Other questions? I can't see anybody online. Either the commissioners.
No questions.
All right. It's going to be tough going, but you know we've been through it before, so I'm confident we'll be able to get through it again. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Looks like we're gonna move on now to our report from our Virginia WMATA board members. And first off, I'd like to congratulate Mr. Smedberg on his re-election for fourth term as WMATA board chair. Congrats or condolences, not too sure, but.
I was gonna do the report and I was gonna start with that, so. You did, and I was the elections committee chair, so I wanna make it clear that it was a fair election. There was no, but the board really appreciates the work that Paul has done and the many hours he spends on all things Metro. for no compensation, I might add, other than the spirit of service that he's been delivering. So we are appreciative of that, and we did have an organizational meeting and elected Paul as the chairman and Lucinda Davers from the district as the first vice chair and Jim Forts of Maryland as the second vice chair. So in other Metro news, the work continues to restore the 7000 series rail cars to service later this summer. As you'll recall, there's a 3-step process restoring the 6000 series service, daily inspections, which are going on now for the 7000 series using a digital gauge. We are restricted by the Metro Rail Safety Commission with how many cars we can bring back with this digital gauge service. So that is restricted at 8 car trains, 8 of them. So 64 cars basically that are being rotated through and undergo this daily inspection process. There have been, as you may have seen, some days where not all 8 cars have gone out in service for various reasons. Those reasons do not include any issues with the actual inspections. But it sounds like there has been some difficulty in some of the rail yards establishing the right rhythm and the right process for continuously getting these inspections done. And that hasn't typically impacted service much, but there are people out there tracking how many trains. And Metro has kind of pulled back a little bit this week as they work on some of the inspection record keeping related to these trains. The next phase that will really allow us to ramp things up is the installation of the automatic wayside inspection systems. And that will permit a gradual restoration of the rest of the 7000 series trains. So process is going on to work with the Metro Rail Safety Commission to get those certified, and also right now internally to test those and make sure that they are working appropriately. The plan is right now the 7000 series trains that are out there are on the yellow and green lines. The plan is to start returning them to the blue line next, and then orange and silver, so that those headways are reduced to 15 minutes in July. And other Metro news, and in something very much long awaited, I know for a lot of folks in this room, on June 23rd, the general manager, NDOF, declared operational readiness for Silver Line Phase 2, which means that Metro is now taking control of that project. So essentially, it's provisional care and control of the extension from MWAT. So WMATA has a lot of testing and training to do, familiarization. One of the things that I've been saying, reminding folks, is about the rail yard in Loudoun County. We have 350 Metro employees that will be working in that rail yard every day. And they're going to be using new equipment, brand new equipment, everything state of the art. A lot of it is stuff that we have in other places, but the newest version of it. So there is familiarization timing that just takes some time to get everybody trained up to that. There's also a great deal of coordination going on with the 2 most impacted jurisdictions, which are Fairfax County and Loudoun County, in terms of our transit bus service that we provide locally. There's a lot of routes that are adjusting for buses when these stations open. And there's lead time that's required with that. So there's regular conversation occurring with the county administrators and the transit folks in Metro on that. The goal is to have Phase 2 open in the fall. The wild card, as we've all discussed before, is that the Safety Commission does have to certify the project. I think Metro and MWA have a pretty good degree of confidence in the physical structure that's out there. The Safety Commission has been at the table for every conversation that's occurred about all of the different issues that we've had with this project over time. So there shouldn't be any surprises there. They will also be evaluating training and our staffing up and things like that. So, we don't know exactly what their time frame will look like and exactly when they'll make that certification. But from Metro's point of view, we're hoping to be ready to go in the fall. And as we get closer, and as this work continues, we'll be working with all the stakeholders to establish an actual service date. And I think that's all I have.
And I have 2 quick things, Mr. Chair. So related to that, I just wanted to acknowledge the help that we had from our 2 senators, Senator Kane and Senator Warner. Paul Wiedefeld and I at the time had 2 meetings, and with the interim GM, Andy Off, with the head of the airport authority and their board chair. it really helped put some things into perspective and push certain issues along. So it was very helpful, particularly from Senator Warner. Wanted to acknowledge that. And then also organizationally, Matt will continue as chair of the finance committee. So he's agreed to do that. And Don Drummer from Maryland will continue to head up safety and operations.
Thank you, Mr. Smedberg. We also still have our WMATA subcommittee. And so, Mr. Alcorn, anything to report?
Just briefly, yes, we did have a WMATA committee meeting last month. We were talking about the 2022 report on the performance and condition of WMATA, which is one of the required things that we do. There was a staff proposal of various strategies to include in that report, a good committee discussion, a few things added. So we're now looking at the following strategies in this report to be discussed at the future meeting too. New financial operating model, labor costs, role of Metrobus and local transit operations, fare evasion, rider confidence, fare structure, and non-fare revenue. So NVTC staff is working to flush these out a little bit, and they'll be discussed at the next committee meeting, which everyone is welcome to attend. We also, the committee asked staff to include a broader context and discussion about WMATA's upcoming FY 2024 operating budget gap and longer term funding issues. So I expect in the coming weeks or months, we'll be hearing updated projections there. Also, NVTC staff provided an update on staff's research paper on peer transit agency funding models. So staff are looking at operating and capital revenues of peer transit agencies and will provide a presentation to the committee with a summary of the findings in the fall. And our next WMATA committee meeting is scheduled for July 21st at 6 p.m. and all are welcome.
Wonderful, thank you. Ms. Garvey and then Mr. Stork.
Okay, question for a Metro reps, if I might. So what other large system like WMATA Metro has their board working for free? It's actually a serious question.
I don't know.
I would like to ask our committee to look into that. I frankly just think this is not something that should continue for like a whole long time. It seems nuts. You guys are doing incredible service. Thank you very much. But for anybody to expect somebody to be doing that kind of work over and over again for free is not fair. Thank you. Just saying, and I don't think it's healthy, actually.
We could ask NVTC staff to include that in the presentation again.
And if I could, I do know in the Commonwealth of Virginia, prohibition against compensation for board members is in the code.
Yeah, no, I know there are big, huge barriers. I just thank you. But I'd love to know where else they do that.
Good question.
Like agencies, do we know generally those are that Metro's being compared to? You know, what you're looking at, could you talk about certain other organizations that would be?
Yeah, a couple of staff mentioned, I believe CTA, Chicago, San Francisco, BART. The team in Boston, I think, was another.
Boston. Yeah. Metro has a comparator group that we always compare for all of our safety metrics, and we just got a presentation on this. Believe it or not, Metro actually does well comparatively on a lot of those metrics when you see the presentation. But anyway, but NVTC is using the same comparator group that Metro uses.
I was going to mention it may be not appropriate, but have we ever looked internationally, and are there one or two others that we should also be at least considering as part of the comparison and so forth?
For the operational issues, you could do that. I think the challenge when we get on this report is a lot of it's about financial, and we're supposed to come up with efficiencies and things like that, and their funding is just so completely different in a lot of places. The whole attitude, everything is just so different that doesn't compare as well. But for operational issues, I don't know, other than maybe getting data, I don't know.
Well, I know one thing we can say with some confidence is that Metro, I think nationally and internationally, is the only organization funded the way we are.
Yeah, it doesn't have an actual recurring funding source.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it doesn't have significant federal and/or, in our case, state support.
And for the peer transit funding study that NVTC staff are conducting internally, one thing we are looking at is the small but useful number of peer transit agencies in the US that are governed by interstate compacts or more than one state. It's a very small pool and they're not exactly the same as Metro, but it's a unique constraint we all know that we have with WMATA. So we're looking to see if there's anything useful to know from how those systems are funded.
Thank you.
Mr. French.
Is there any update based on both your reports, like a time frame when there might, just a reminder on a time frame when there might be a financial estimate update?
Yeah, I think what we're hoping to do is, I mean, the board's been having some discussions about it. I think late summer, September timeframe, we want to try to have the latest projections that are updated for what the ridership has been, what we think is happening with return to work, and what our spend rates are, as well as, you know, I've mentioned before, we're going to have some increased costs due to inflation and staffing and things like that. So all of that baked in. I think there are some numbers that we have now, but we're going to work to try to get those out. And then I think the discussion will really turn into kind of a conversation about fare versus service, because we will have a budget gap. You know, it's not as big as we were concerned that it would be, but it's still going to be sizable. And so we're going to have to decide, you know, do we go entirely into reducing service and potentially impacting workforce as a way to save money, or do we look at our fare? I mean, it has been 5 years since Metro's raised fares. Now it's difficult to have that conversation when the service has been less than optimal. Hopefully that's going to have, you know, be gradually improving throughout the summer and into the fall. But I think people out there do understand that costs have gone up for everything, you know, and certainly, you know, when you gas up your car, you see that every time. So it's certainly logical that Metro has also experienced that, and the fares have been flat for 5 years. So I think it is worth a conversation, and that will be something on the table, I think, for the board. And we want to get input from all the stakeholders and then the public in terms of, you know, we may potentially be able to, you know, keep levels of service, you know, better than what we would be if we had additional revenue from fare. So, and a component of that for us is absolutely the fare evasion piece that NVTC is working on. And Paul and I have spent many hours on this topic already. And the incoming general manager is going to be very focused on this issue, and we'll have, I think, more to say about that perhaps at our next commission meeting.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments, concerns?
Sorry, I have one.
Go ahead.
Is there, on the digital data records that I think is the last 24, 48 hours?
The 7K.
The 7K.
The 7K, is there, it seems, I know there are things you can't say, but it seems like a temporary problem. Is there anything that you could say? Just because, you know, with the eagerness to keep getting as many times 8 back in service as often as possible. I think that's for you a little bit more.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of steps that they have to take. They've gone beyond what would probably be perceived as being acceptable in this case. So I think they're just making sure that everything is being captured properly and recorded properly, and because we are taking so many steps. You know,
it's a really,
it's a burden. It's an administrative burden, and you know, I think that's they're overdoing it. But
there's a lot of prescription to some of the things that WMATA is being asked to do by the Safety Commission that I'm not sure that, you know, a lot of folks don't have insight into that. But, you know, I will mention there was a story that some of you probably saw about how Metro had improperly stored a 7K that was supposed to be out of service. Do you know the story I'm talking about? Well, you need to have the context that those trains are marked 3 different ways in 3 different places. And one of those places was out of place. Just one. And one occasion. And it was immediately rectified. And that was the story. That one time happened with one of those 3 signs.
And it happened well before the story.
Yeah, months before. So
But it had the consequence of pulling a
Part of the
number of
policy.
trains out of
Yes.
service.
Oh, no, that nothing happened in that case, except that it became part of the Safety Commission report at their last meeting and then was reported on by the Post. And I think without a lot of context, it looked like some other
Making
thing
it-
that Metro had really messed up. And when in reality, there was, that train was never going back to service at that time. There was no risk of that occurring. And there was a mistake made in one of the placards, and that was corrected. But I'm just giving that as an example that the context on a lot of these discussions sometimes is lacking, and the very prescriptive nature of the regulatory safety body on Metro is very unique to something that we have here, and some would say deserved, given the record, but it requires a lot of steps that are taking a lot of time in some areas.
And in instances like that, they effectively report to no one. I mean, each of our jurisdiction, the 3 jurisdictions appoint folks, but there's little, if any, oversight or accountability on that.
Yeah, helpful context, didn't mean it. Thank you.
Just want to echo some of the comments of my colleagues to say thank you to our Virginia board members for all their service. And also, if you happen to see our senators Kane or Warner, be sure to give them a quick thank you. All right, so moving on to item number 6, it's going to be the proposed Commonwealth Transportation Board changes to the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund and NVTC Vermont State Assistance. So on June 21st, the Secretary of Transportation directed the Commonwealth Transportation Board to cut part of the state funding that our jurisdictions use to support their WMATA capital and operating subsidy from DRPT's 6-year improvement program. And it was also cut very far into the budget timeline, which is a little unusual. So this was a surprise to a lot of us. In addition to information in your board materials, I've asked Ms. Matthijs to provide some details and some more context, and then so we can provide some direction to staff on next steps. Ms. Matthijs, if you don't mind.
Thank you. And indeed, we do have some materials included in the meeting package. I just want to step back a little bit, just give a little bit of timeline and context. So back in April of this year, DRPT released a draft FY23 6-year improvement program. Now, 6-year improvement program, that's the document that authorizes transit funding for the upcoming year. So again, there was a draft, and those numbers were circulated back in April 2022. And so in that document, DRPT proposed a significant increase in FY23 state funding for DRPT's transit programs, which included, in addition to our local transit systems and VRE, also included NVTC's jurisdictional payments to WMATA. So obviously this was a very welcome indication to our jurisdictions of state support that could really help our systems now and into the future. But to be clear, we've actually had a lot of conversations with other jurisdiction after the CTB meeting 2 weeks ago. Because of the timeline, that April 2022, it's true, these funds were not anticipated in our localities' current fiscal year budgets. However, once that draft SIP was released, our localities did factor these into future revenue outlooks, especially with an eye for how these funds could support their jurisdictional payments to WMATA in the coming years. So then to fast forward to just about 2 weeks ago at the CTB meeting, again, this was a meeting where the final SIP for all the transportation programs was slated for approval. And at this meeting, CTB moved to approve the DRPT SIP at the time at which the Secretary of Transportation directed to remove $72 million from a line item called NVTC WMATA Assistance. And again, these are funds that come to the localities to then pay towards their WMATA bill. So this is not the dedicated capital funding. This is used by our localities to pay their bill for WMATA that is both capital and operating, just to give you some background. So, and to give you some context of the impact of the $72 million that was removed, the draft SIP that was presented in April was, and this is all included in your materials, was about $273 million. And so then the recommendation that moved forward was just about just over $200 million. And so what this looks like and is presented is a 26% decrease from what was proposed in April. And in fact, a 24% reduction from what we actually saw at the end of the year last year. But again, full disclosure, we were very fortunate over the last couple of years for DRPT demonstrating increased funding to our transit systems. So this is actually about a 16% increase in funding over what our jurisdictions received in 21. A little wonky, a little complicated. I'm trying to tell sort of the true story of what was happening during that time. One of the things, as the chair mentioned, the action was definitely a surprise. I think it caught a lot of us off guard. It may be unprecedented. I don't, in the time that I've been here, have not seen a specific line item moved out of the SIP to then be voted on later on. We are concerned, if you listen to the testimony from that CTB meeting, that there may have been unclear understanding of the role of our localities and where we are in terms of supporting WMATA for capital and operations. It also, we are concerned that the secretary and the CTB may not understand all of the work that's actually going on in this body. And thank you, Chair Alcorn, because you highlighted a number of the things that the WMATA committee is working on that are specifically addressing concerns that were also articulated by the secretary at this past meeting. So looking ahead, on July 20th, so just about 2 weeks out from now, the CTB will be meeting again. At that time, they're going to be approving the reallocation of this $72 million. It is my understanding that it's to be reallocated to VDOT's highway maintenance in support of increased costs in the maintenance fund due to inflation. It's also my understanding that if these funds are not tapped into and used during 23, that they would revert back to the Commonwealth Transportation Fund for reallocation in the future years. There is, however, an opportunity for public comment at the July 20th CTB meeting. There's an opportunity to share NVTC's concerns about this last minute removal, switching up, especially in light of the fact that our jurisdictions were looking at those funds for future years. There's also an opportunity, I believe, to educate the Secretary and the Commonwealth Transportation Board, which will, by the way, include 4 new members at that meeting, about NVTC, about how much we value a sustainable and reliable metro system, and to speak to the policy priorities that we're focused on right now. So I would definitely appreciate any direction from the commission regarding that July 20th CTV meeting.
So real fast, just to give y'all some of my perspective on this, I think number one, it definitely warrants some type of response. What that response is, we're of course going to discuss now, but I think it definitely has to come from approach, as Ms. Matai said, that there are similarities, that we have shared concerns looking at WMATA, that we want to inform the body, CTV, of, you know, not just who we are, but what we're doing, because as Ms. Matai said, we are going to have 4 new CTV members on there at that meeting, and the last part is a little bit more nuanced, but I'm sure we're going to get into that as we start discussion. But Mr. Skiles, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with the question. My understanding is that the overall amount was reduced to 201 million, correct? And that is a 14% increase over what was allocated in fiscal year 2022, is that correct?
Actually, over 2021.
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually 16%, but yeah.
Right, and have we had any, obviously we have several CTV representatives that represent us here in Northern Virginia and urban at large. Has anyone spoken to our CTV members, secretary, to understand why this was proposed?
So I've talked to Mary Hines, who's the Northern Virginia person. We did not know ahead of time, but I talked to her since this had occurred. We have talked to folks within the secretary's office as well as DRPT.
And no real indication as to.
I don't want to speak for the
the
rationale. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I just want to note, I would hope that CTB in its wisdom would be able to come to the conclusion, at least that I have, that if the money is redirected from Metro, I understand the issue of road maintenance. I have a lot of roads in my district that need help. A lot of them are substandard. But I would hope that the CTB could put it upon themselves to keep the money in the region at a minimum. We do have competing needs. I think the CTB would understand that, not just with Metro, but also with the secondary roads in particular. that need the road funds. So I would support us making that request or suggestion. The other, that it be kept in the region. The other thing I would just, more on the education side, I think it would be good for maybe a reminder of how Metro is funded by the jurisdictions in Northern Virginia. And frankly, I know in Fairfax County, and I'm sure this is true in most of our jurisdictions, talking about real estate taxes as the primary source and making that connection. So, you know, if you're taking away and basically, I think we all need to be careful that we're not overburdening the real estate tax whenever we make these sort of decisions. So, thank you.
Mr. Robinson.
Yeah, I mean, I think to answer Mr. Scott's question, I think the secretary said it, right? I mean, that the reason is that they underestimated the cost of maintenance and repaving programs due to increased contractor costs. And, you know, this body sent a letter during the General Assembly session when there were conversations about the gas tax, pointing out that at the same time, a lot of folks in Richmond, Secretary and folks in the General Assembly were saying, we got more money than we know what to do with. VDOT was telling a lot of us around this table that we can't repave the streets in your neighborhoods that we thought we could because we don't have enough money to do it. So it was known months and months ago that repaving was going to be much more expensive this year for all the obvious reasons that we all know. So it seems like this is the effort to address that. I agree with what Supervisor Alcorn said. You know, I think the only other thing I would point out, you know, there's a long history with this body and previous governors debating the respective contributions to Metro, and the previous governor was successful in gaining control of an appointment to the WMATA board, now ably filled. But he did that by making the argument that the Commonwealth is contributing more and more and more. And it's important to note that since that happened more than a decade ago, the real dollar contributions from the Commonwealth of Virginia, the $50 million from PREA, have decreased because $50 million is not worth what it was worth a decade ago. So, you know, I want to be diplomatic in our approach, but this is kind of moving in the wrong direction. I don't think the governor is going to give NVTC or Fairfax County another voting board seat on WMATA. I don't think we're going to get that seat back. But I think it's okay for us to point out that there's been that dialogue and tension over the years where governors have talked about the Commonwealth's commitment to WMATA. And we value that and want to see that continue.
Thank you, Mr. Waukesha. Mr. Bell.
Two things I wanted to make a comment on. Definitely, there's been a lot of discussion. We've got so much money and there shouldn't be any problems. One of the key discussions, I think, that dominated many of the things from the session is what is one-time money and what is a funding stream? Because a lot of the money, as you know, from your positions is from the federal government related to COVID, and it's one-time money. And it's going to go away. So there were limitations on where that could be spent. Certainly it could fill some buckets and create, you know, opportunities in others. But so I think that's one issue. The second issue, I'm going to go back in time. For those of you that don't know very well, I'm a retired Air Force officer and I was a finance officer during my career. My last job, I actually managed the budget for the Air Force in Europe. And we used to say when I was at the Pentagon to tell the Aunt Martha story. So if you need money for something or you don't get money, how would you tell your Aunt Martha what goes wrong if you don't get it? So the best, most successful requests were ones that said, this thing breaks, we stop doing this, and the world comes to a screeching halt because of X, Y, and Z. Those got funded. I appreciate your explanation, but I think we need to be much more compelling if we want to go back to the CDB and even have a chance at having them change what they're doing. I think we need to tell a very compelling story what happens if we don't get this money, and we need to give specifics. And I agree with what your remarks were, that try to get that kept in the region, because certainly we have those same funding challenges with our roads in this region. And as, you know, a legislator who sees a lot of our money go to Richmond and us get a small percentage back in Northern Virginia, I don't want it to decrease in this area either. So my suggestions would be, yes, we need to respond. Yes, we need to respond in a compelling, specific, very crisp response, and we need to fight to keep it in the region.
Agreed. You know, I think during executive committee, we were having a little bit of a conversation around the economic argument and the opportunity costs. Yeah, so very much so in line with what you're saying with the compelling, how do I tell my Aunt Martha? Mr. Turner and then Ms. Crystal.
Just very briefly, I just want to make sure I heard this correctly. We know for a fact 72 million will be earmarked for repaving needs. It won't go off into a fuzzy ball somewhere and magically end up not in repaving.
So it's my understanding that that is where it's been identified and that's where the action is. But I've not seen the meeting materials to demonstrate that that was what was vocalized at the meeting.
Kate, to what extent, I mean, I would associate myself, I think, although we maintain our own roads, but given the interest of the region with Mr. Alcorn's point about wanting any funding that would be removed from the region to help meet the obligations of WMATA to pay instead for paving, be in some way earmarked for the region, but to your knowledge, I mean, does VDOT's budget work that way?
I am
think-
not an expert
yeah.
in the VDOT budget.
Okay.
I unfortunately am not. I don't know if any of the staff who are here, but I'm really, that's an area I'm not comfortable
Speculating. I guess what I would say is I would be a little surprised if it does. Nor am I an expert in VDOT's budget. And so I think I just wanted to suggest that the opportunity cost is a way of getting to that point. Like if we are interested in keeping these investments in the region, which is powering the growth of the Commonwealth, then this stream of funding to localities to help meet our WMATA bills that allows us to not increase the property tax burden, invest in other things that make our roads work, for example, intelligent transportation systems that keeps the congestion clearer on the roads and allows our roads to need less maintenance because of less wear and tear. That is an excellent way to ensure that this region can keep moving forward and that paving money is well spent here. Because there will be other paving money spent here, irrespective of whether this money removed from the WMATA aid goes to this bucket. So, I think, again, just to sort of tee up that opportunity cost, the opportunity cost here, the Aunt Martha thing here, what happens or what will happen with this vote that they've already made to strip is that the property tax burden is going to increase, or localities are going to be less able to make the kind of transportation improvements that makes the whole system work.
Thanks. I guess one of the advantages or disadvantages of having been on this commission so long is you've kind of seen all this before. And I was here in the early days when Virginia dug itself into a pit by doing exactly what's being proposed here, robbing Peter to pay Paul. And then our transportation system gradually went downhill, and it took real political courage to fund it, to bring it back up again. We're now in the process of restoring it. There's no question that we need more money for highways. There's no question that there's been inflation. There's also no question that Metro has a serious issue that has to be met one way or the other, and that inflation has hit Metro as well. So I hope we don't get caught in the trap of suggesting that we'll take money from one element of our transportation system to give it to another. Rather, we should be saying we need all of this funding for the transportation system that, by the way, in Northern Virginia supports the rest of the state. I would hope that's the principled position we take. CTV may do whatever they're going to do, but I don't think they should do it with our support.
Mr. Faust.
I like Dave's position, but I think we also have to have an alternative because I don't think it's going to get anywhere with that. $72 million is a lot of money. We're going to lose some major portion. But do we have to lose it all? Is there a specific ask that we could go back with? It says, we understand the importance of maintaining the roads, and we hope that money comes in Northern Virginia to maintain roads. But there's this specific reason, this $12 million, $15 million reason why we should get to keep that amount of money, so we don't lose it all.
was gonna go a little bit higher, like 50%, but. Other questions, comments, Mr. Letourneau?
Yeah, I mean, so the challenge with this, we talked about the second committee, is this money was money that our jurisdictions were going to use in future years to pay our subsidies, which are capped at 3% anyway. So it was gonna be helpful to us as subsidy money. It was not gonna flow to Metro, and it wasn't gonna be extra money for Metro to help the fiscal cliff issue. It was just gonna help the jurisdiction, which is, obviously I'm all for that. And I completely agree with the sentiment that the money should stay in the region. But I don't know that it's the most compelling argument when from year to year, it's still a plus up from where it was last year in terms of the aid to the jurisdictions. Right, it's still more than what was in 21. What I think is a concern about what happened is the timing and the process. And so my comments in executive committee were more that we should probably focus a little bit more on that, which is, this came out of nowhere. There was no dialogue with anyone. We didn't even know it was on the agenda. And it was proposed as, taking something away that we had been told we were getting back in April. And it's very late in the process. Unfortunately, none of the jurisdictions had budgeted this money into this current fiscal year's budget because it came so late. But if they had, then this process really would have been a problem because they're taking away money that we had relied on. So I think in addition to the comments about the value of Metro overall, because the secretary did make some comments in the meeting that were very negative about WMATA. And Paul and I are working to, work with the administration to work through some of those issues and I think find areas that we have alignment and concerns about WMATA that they have. But I think in response to that, we do need to sort of make some of these arguments about the value of Metro overall to the entire region. And that's a good thing to do. And then talk a little bit just from a process standpoint, we wouldn't want something like this to happen again in this fashion, because if it did, it could be on an issue or a funding stream that would be much more impactful to us. So that's kind of my general sentiment.
Ms. Garvey and then Mr. Waukesha.
Yeah, just a thought, and it may not be an issue, but I'm wondering if some of what's going on is you've got new folks who kind of don't understand what we do or how it works. And we're all sure about everybody, how much this region means to the state and what we've got going with Amazon and the Innovation Center and the data process. This is incredible growth. I don't know that that's maybe really understood either, or or what transit and how it all works. So I think we're misunderstood possibly, and that's like a fundamental misunderstanding that we also have to clear up before we go for like specific amounts in a way. See, it's kind of a two-pronged approach, if you see.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, it's like we were saying, with the conversation that we're having with them, it's not just introducing ourselves and showing that we have shared concerns, but also how things kind of work and painting a picture and then getting to that Aunt Martha story.
Exactly.
And then getting to that kind of hard ask, if you will. Mr. Waukesha.
Kate, I mean, maybe you can help me understand the plus up. So from FY 21 to FY 22, there was an increase, and the money for this comes portion, a percentage of the Commonwealth Transportation Fund. That there were plus ups across the board because of the federal money and quote unquote surplus that Commonwealth has. Trying to put this plus up in context. I don't think that it was, people said, wow, we really need to do a new investment in Metro. I think they had a lot of money and were distributing across the board. I don't know that the plus up for Metro was even necessary for this account was even among the highest of plus ups that came out of the Commonwealth Transportation.
So yeah, it's my, when we talked to DRVT, these are additional revenues that the state had. I can't necessarily say that there was a federal to state, but what we do know is there was additional revenues available with the Commonwealth Transportation Fund that we were able to get even amended 22 funding. And that was, of course, then also rolled into the proposed for 23. So this indeed was, there's a little bit of nuance as well. In 2020, there was the new omnibus transportation bill. And what it did is it changed some of the percentages. You take the Commonwealth Transportation Fund, in particular the transit fund, there's a certain percentage for WMATA what NVTC jurisdictions will modify, and then the rest for DRPT. There was an enactment clause that allowed the change in percentage to be delayed. And this, I believe the CTB had the policy to delay it. So some of these increased numbers reflected the old percentages, which gave about 53.5% of the Commonwealth Transportation Fund transit part to the WMATA payment. The new code actually ends up reducing that because it was anticipating additional revenue. So what we've got is a weird timing thing. Last year, CTP continued and kept the old percentages. What the secretary did was immediately implement just for the WMATA bill, these new percentages. It is a procedural thing, but that was the justification for removing the money, was to change to these new percentages. Scott, am I giving it justice?
Perfect.
Okay, because it is really, there's a lot of folks who've been involved in understanding exactly what happened, especially because there were additional funds proposed and how that sort of plays out in terms of the process for our jurisdictions in developing their budgets. Almost the easier thing would have been able to say, we had budgeted this money and now it's gone. Well, what our jurisdictions, when they saw this additional funding, their budgets were already going through, but it was definitely to be looking forward to the future and being able to use it. And that is where we definitely heard from all of our jurisdictions, eyes on these additional funds to help in future years.
Got it. Okay, and then it's just final point, it sounded like the secretary made some negative comments about Metro in this context. Maybe that can be part of the education and our message, because this action isn't sending any message to Metro. I mean, we thought this was sending a message to Metro. It doesn't. It's not going to hurt Metro. It's going to hurt homeowners and property taxpayers in Northern Virginia. They're the ones that are going to get hit hard by this, because we're paying the 3% regardless. It's a question of who pays it and where it comes from. No one's going to shed a tear at Metro about this. Our taxpayers will be the ones shedding tears.
So, I mean, every comment, every different style of advocacy says we absolutely should go and speak, it seems to me. Exactly how to do it, certainly Kate, you and Amy and maybe Matt, your points. Certainly if others want to get involved, I don't feel quite equipped to script every piece of that advocacy, but I really think we should do it. And that can involve some combination of the right people that I don't know CTV and the secretary as well. And so maybe we're at a point where those interested could engage with you, and there might be a few of us, probably Matt, Paul, and you, Kate, and others who would be best equipped to craft that message. But I think that's the one common thread that everybody has said, which is absolutely we should be there. So.
Can I suggest that Martha go?
Well, he's a good advocate.
Mr. Scott.
Yeah, I guess in the category, everything's been said, but not everybody has said it. Obviously, I think this caught a lot of people by surprise. I certainly think, and I agree with what Supervisor Faust said about potentially going back with a hard ask. I would be careful about how we position this with the administration, that they maybe don't understand the region or transportation systems. As I recall, there's a former staff member that was at NVTC that's now in the secretary's office. So I think part of the issue, and I think this plays into the discussion about long-term funding for Metro, and I think you have a view of Metro within this administration. And the system has had a lot of challenges, and part of that is going to be educating and talking about the changes that are being made through the leadership of the board and trying to get that system right sized. So, I mean, I think that is part of a larger narrative. And I agree, James, this doesn't necessarily hit Metro, it hits the jurisdictions, but obviously, ultimately, the taxpayers. But ultimately, it's the system that there's clearly some concerns about in terms of management and operations. So I share that as you put together your messaging. And I think that probably plays more to the long-term funding that's being talked about, because I think there's probably a great deal of skepticism about coming and asking for a dedicated source of revenue for a system that can't seem to manage what it's getting currently.
Yeah,
If I may.
like I said at the beginning, very nuanced all around for various reasons. Ms. Palchik, go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. No, I think a lot was already said, and much of what we discussed in executive. I think the one area that we haven't said as much here, I think it was said a little bit, is the fact that this is a major driver, literally, of our economic engine here. And that, not only is it hitting the jurisdictions and the taxpayers, but also we know that if we're not supporting Metro and our transit systems, that we will continue to see increased demand and use and congestion in our roads, and it continues to hit our economic engine here. So I know we discussed a little bit about thinking through some outreach, perhaps with our groups, our chambers, our Tyson's partnership groups, that may also be beneficial in this education and outreach to the CTV.
Thank you, Ms. Palchik. Ms. Gilroy, did you want to get in there too? What I was gonna say is, I don't think we need a formal motion on this, but I think there is overall consensus that we do want our executive director to go testify at the July meeting. Ms. Matthijs, there's a lot to take in. Are you feeling comfortable? You at least know that you're gonna be at that meeting.
I do, and I think that I've written down all the various ideas. I think having that small group to, I put something together, pass back and forth or what have you, I think that'll be very, very helpful. Again, this is about 2 weeks away, so of course I've already got thoughts. So I'll likely, to be able to work with a small group to refine that in advance of that Wednesday, the 20th. That would be very helpful.
Okay, very good. Any last comments or thoughts? All right, well, appreciate everybody's input on this. Like I said, have to craft this in the proper way. Okay, so moving to agenda item number 7, which I believe is our Transit Resource Center. In addition to a written update on the Envision Route 7 BRT and your materials, we have a staff presentation from Xavier and Sophie on regional transit performance through the pandemic. I think there's going to be some exciting things, but Ms. Matthijs, if you can provide some framing comments.
I'd be happy to do so. And some of you may not know, so NVTC, we actually have a historically reported transit performance data that we actually historically used to download from DRPT and download from WMATA and put up on our website in static tables, which is almost embarrassing to say that. And it was a process in which staff were downloading, manipulating data, and we basically just got it up and just in time. And one of the things that's been quite remarkable is the ability to get rid of that very labor-intensive process and actually bring analytical stories. And so both DRPT and WMATA have moved to online data portals. So what means we can use the talents of our staff to go beyond the raw data and help telling the story. So this is really sort of what I hope is the first of many great presentations led by Xavier with support from Sophie. And this opportunity is really talking about what's happened to transit over the course of the pandemic. And I think you'll see there's a lot of different things, both in ridership as well as service provided. And so I'm going to hand it over to Xavier and Sophie to show us what they got. There's also copies here for those who like to doodle.
Okay, and thank you to our chair. I want to begin by reintroducing myself to everyone. I've only been at MTC for a few months. I joined in March. My name is Xavier Harmony, and I'm the program manager of Transit Resource Center. I'm joined here by Sophie Spilotopoulos, who is a program analyst who supports this program. So this is something that this study that we're going to be telling you about today is something that I find a lot of fun. I'm a self-described transit nerd, so bear with me if I get a little too excited with some of these things, but this is something that I really enjoy and I really like digging into. So I actually especially appreciated Commissioner Crystal's comment earlier about how transit data is the lifeblood of transit. I obviously took that to heart, and I like to consider this study in a way sort of like how well Northern Virginia's heart is beating, looking at the transit data in this region and how it has changed the patterns have changed, the trends have changed in the last few years. So we're going to kick it off with Sophie, who's going to give the overview and the intro to the data.
Next slide, please. Great. So as I hope you are all well aware, transit is a huge part of Northern Virginia's life. I hope you're aware because we're here. 11% of our region's residents use public transit for commuting, and this is more than double the national average of about 5%. Although it is important to note that transit is used for so much more than commuting. So what are we doing here today? We looked at ridership and service trends across the region from 2019 through the pandemic, and then focused on 4 main goals for this analysis. So first, we wanted to do just an overview of the major transit trends over the last 3 years, and then we wanted to dive a little bit deeper and explore how travel patterns and habits have changed in the recent region, as well as how transit service has changed. So as Kate mentioned, we are looking at ridership as well as service. And then finally, we wanted to summarize these findings to provide some key transit takeaways for the region that NVTC can use to help support our agencies, help support agencies' transit recoveries. So next slide, please. So there were 2 interesting points of a lot that we found in this data from our analysis on the ridership side over the last 3 years. So the first of which was that how people travel has changed. I know that we've heard this over time, but it was really great to get into the data and see it right there in front of us. So we can see that how people travel has changed in the way that bus and paratransit have recovered differently than rail. And when I say rail, I mean both commuter rail and heavy rail. So as of February of this year, bus and paratransit had reached nearly 50% of pre-pandemic ridership, while rail was still just below 25%. I will caveat this by saying that this is February data and we are now in July, so it's a little bit behind, but we are expecting this recovery to be even higher now. So before the pandemic, rail had twice the ridership of bus, but we have found that today that has equalized to nearly an even share of ridership on both sides. And you can see clearly on the left side of the graph, the left-hand graph, that there's a sharp decrease in ridership right as the pandemic began in March. And then the 2 green lines that kind of come back up on the top are bus and paratransit. And you can see that those have a higher return to the 2019 ridership levels, as I just mentioned earlier. And then you can see that heavy rail and commuter rail have had a slower increase back to 2019 levels. And as we've heard before many times, these differing recovery rates are likely related to different transit populations who ride these different modes, like who has access for alternate travel options like telework or cars. And then looking onto the right-hand side of the screen, you can see that we also found that riders are moving away from classic weekday travel pattern. So pre-pandemic weekend trips were only 35% of weekday trips. But by the end of 2020, that percentage had shot up to 58% of weekday trips. So that's weekend trips being 58% of weekday trips. So this highlights that the pandemic affected commuter trips more than other types of trips. So other types of trips meaning day-to-day, like life trips, going to the doctor, going shopping, going out and about, which usually happen on the weekends. So this helps us explain why weekend travel is more than weekday travel. It's less commuting and not more increase other. So moving on to some interesting findings from our service trends. If Tenley could go to the next slide, yes. We found that transit service generally saw some changes right at the beginning of the pandemic, but has overall returned to pre-pandemic service levels. So this goes for quantity of service as well as type of service provided. We saw that service patterns have, for the most part, continued to focus on those weekday and peak travel, which are classically commuter-oriented service patterns. We also found that the commuter-oriented agencies saw the biggest and most prolonged changes to their service. So this graph that you're seeing up there shows how transit service has returned. You can take a look at the green line, which is an average of all of those gray lines being the individual transit agencies' service level, service as in service hours. You can see the dip around March in that green line, showing how agencies cut service right at the beginning of the pandemic, and then you can see it come back up as service returned to generally returned to about 2019 levels, and that would be that 100% would be a 2019 level. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Xavier to bring this all together with some key points from our findings.
So really, thank you, Sophie. There were, I think, 4 main points that we were able to pull together from these data. First of all, returning service was correlated with ridership recovery, which is positive to see. As we brought back more service, more people started using the service. But importantly, one size doesn't fit all. And some of those who might read the Washington Post might have seen an article last week where we saw modes around the region compared, including transit, showing some of these trends. And what we found really supports that some of that same trends. But we also want to emphasize that this is an opportunity for the region to reevaluate what transit ridership looks like today. There have been some changes, and this is an opportunity to better understand those changes and how people's behaviors and habits have changed and look different today. And there's also an opportunity for the region to redesign transit services for how people use transit today. So some of the things that we did 4 or 5 years ago for transit might not be as applicable today. This is a good opportunity for us to explore those a little bit further and see how things might look different. Next slide, please. So looking at the changes in the region, I want to really emphasize this point that the recovery that we saw through different transit agencies was different by different modes. I think it was back in the May legislative policy meeting where Commissioner Walkinshaw highlighted that not all agencies are going to recover the same way. And this is what we really found in the data. But it's important to recognize that just because agencies recover differently doesn't mean agencies are not really working towards achieving ridership recovery. And I think a good example of a unique challenge and a unique opportunity here is what we saw with BRE. So in BRE's case, they've had, as many know, they've struggled to return to their pre-pandemic ridership. But they're also an example of an agency in our region that really understands and listens to their riders. And what we have here is an example of how they've gone through this process. So in April in 2021, at the BRE Ops Board meeting, they had a public comment requesting return to full service. In May, they announced a return to full service, and in June, they returned to full service. This is an example of BRE listening to their customers, their riders, the people who use their system, and acting accordingly. Between March to April and April to May, we saw only very little ridership increases. But then May to June, when they returned to full service, we saw a 40% increase in ridership, a real outlier in their ridership recovery. I like to highlight this because it's a good example of BRE listening to their riders, knowing their riders best, and making improvements that really help their ridership recover. Next example, please. So the next example I know is particularly close to our chair's heart, as it's already producing really promising results in Alexandria. So as hopefully we all know, Dash and Alexandria went through a network redesign that was implemented in September 2021. So there was a renewed focus on all-day service. There was increased accessibility was a focus, and some of the service changes that happened at the time really reflected the changes that are happening in the region during the pandemic. This was an opportunity that Dash was able to take advantage of, changing their service, reflecting these changes that we saw in the data over this time period. So what you can see on this graph in front of you is actually the change in trips throughout an average weekday between 2019 and 2022 for Dash. So the dotted line is 2019, 2022 is now. The solid line is now. And so what we see is that solid line is higher up in the middle of the day, and it's higher up in the PM in the evening. So what this indicates is there are more trips in the middle of the day, that more all-round service, that all-day service, that facilitates the trips that aren't just commute trips, the trips that are going to the doctor, going shopping, those life trips. And so Dash was able to respond to some of these changes they saw in the region and reacted accordingly. Now what's great is that after the redesign and of course elimination of fares, Dash ridership grew from less than 50% of average pre-pandemic levels, one of the lowest in the region at the time, to more than 70% of average pre-pandemic levels, making Dash one of the highest recovery rates in the region. So we saw that they were able to respond to the data and the changes happening at the time, made changes that really had them become one of the leaders in the region in terms of ridership recovery. Next slide, please. So what do we do with all this information? We've done a lot of data digging, but we want to be more than just showing you what's happened in the past. Some of these negative impacts of COVID to transit will resolve themselves as more employers return to the office. That's something we know, and there's not a whole lot we can do about when employees return to the office. But there are some things we can do as NVTC and as the region. First, we know that bus is a flexible transit mode and can adapt to the changing travel patterns of the region better than some other modes. And we saw that in the data, but there's also ways we can take advantage of that. First, regional partners have already begun analyzing and adapting to these changes in the impacts to bus. So we saw Dash has completed their redesign. Fairfax Connector is in the process of reviewing their bus service. And I'm sure we also all know the WMATA bus network redesign is just underway. So there's all these changes to the bus that are happening that will be able to take advantage of the opportunities and changes we see in the region and help that ridership recovery. Another opportunity is NVTC's regional bus plan. So this is a project that we've had slated for a little while now, and thanks to DRPT for approving some funding for us to get this underway as well. But the purpose of this project is to help connect individual transit agency strategic plans in this region into a more regional plan, where we can identify regional gaps, potential cross-jurisdictional transit corridors like the Route 7 project, but in other cases, and opportunities to share infrastructure and resources between agencies. A way where we can be that value add and help everyone come together and create a more connected system across the region. And then finally, transit marketing. NVTC and other regional transit organizations are implementing marketing campaigns, and I don't want to speak too much on that because you'll hear more about that later. But it's all to help further encourage ridership. And I think that's our last slide. Thank you for listening to us. This stuff is definitely very exciting to me and to Sophie, but we're very optimistic about the future of the transit in this region and very happy to answer any questions if there are.
Very exciting stuff. Any questions from our commissioners?
This is fascinating. Thank you, guys. So looking at the two case studies, at risk of oversimplifying, is it possible that the lesson here is just run more service? Right? Bring back service expeditiously after cancellations. I just think about how much time we've spent on money, right? Hypothetically, on marketing campaigns or new fare products or other experiments. But to me, it's if you run more service, people are getting on transit. So I'd be interested in your reactions to that and whether you think that's an oversimplification from what we're seeing here or in other peer systems that may be on your radar.
There is a common saying in transit and transportation, build it and they will come. I think we definitely see some of that, but I think that it's slightly more nuanced. I think you're right, in some ways it does sound like an oversimplification. It's not just having service, it's having the right kind of service, because we've seen some evidence that the way people use transit might be a little bit different to how it was used pre-pandemic. We need to not just bring back service, but think about the type of service we bring back. Does it still match the way people use transit today? And that's why I think we need to do a little bit more to understand how people use transit today, so that the service we do bring back that accurately matches how people want to use service. Right. Essentially, there's definitely that build and they will come sort of thread through this work we did.
And just to build off of that, when we were going through our redesign in Alexandria, we were trying to be very purposeful of where we were going to put that frequent service, because if we had maintained it on some of the previous lines, I don't think it would have had the same effect.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think it's too much of an oversimplification. I think you're pretty there, but it's a couple other things on there. Any other questions, Mr. Snyder?
So as I take the two charts together, the one is the ridership is still dramatically down, particularly in rail and commuter rail, and yet the service is back up. What's been the effect on the financials? What's occurred to fill in the financial gap, and what is the increase in subsidy that's been necessary to do that? That'll be an interesting follow-on study. Those two things mean that you're creating or exacerbating a financial gap. You have less people paying and you have a high level of service. So by definition, you're creating a financial gap or expanding a financial gap. What is that?
Definitely. something I think we're paying close attention to in Alexandria as well. Glenn, fair for you.
What are some examples about changes in business models that might be relevant here?
Well, I was just gonna address that. One of the things Supervisor Faust knows about this with the Fairfax connector with phase 2 and the rerouting of the connector buses. The old system had been geared to commuters getting on Metro, but when we looked at the numbers, it turns out more people were using the connector to get from one place in Reston Herndon to another place in Reston Herndon. So with the new routing, we took that into consideration and changed accordingly. It's just a different model.
Smart.
May come as a surprise, but the city of Fairfax has a bus system as well. And we are also doing a de novo top to bottom review of our system. We've implemented some things and we're in the process of considering some significant changes moving forward. We went fare free and have always been fare free since March of 20. And to answer your question, Mr. Snyder, only 8% of our revenues accounted for only 8% of our costs. And we simply made adjustments in our budget process to cover the rest of it to be permanently fare free. And we did it for several reasons. The cost of conversion of equipment, the additional protection of our drivers, but most especially as a part of our social equity initiative to level the playing field and ensure permanent access to transit for all people. So it was an investment. It was a significant commitment on the part of the city, but it wasn't as draconian as we may have thought. And as far as increased ridership, the cost to the city for increased riders is de minimis because we're there anyway. And we are, as Mr. Alcorn said, we are looking at the of all of our routes and the timing and to ensure that we're meeting the greatest need for the greatest number of people to optimize the ridership as best we can. So I think all transit is local, and every analysis, every decision-making matrix is specific to that particular jurisdiction. But anyway.
Mr. Watkinson and Ms. Carter.
Yeah, I'm wondering, great report, thank you. Wondering whether you're able to see any patterns in terms of which parts of the region or even which stations have seen a return to ridership faster. My hunch is that the Pentagon, for example, has returned faster than Lafayette. People are going to civilian agencies. That's just a guess. I'm just wondering, are any of those patterns readily identifiable across the region? And at what point it's a question maybe for all of us, but at what point do we accept that those patterns are permanent, that commuting patterns have shifted permanently and routes that worked in 2018 no longer work and new different routes are needed? Even our analysis of the connector ridership, a big chunk of that analysis is based on pre-pandemic data. We're gonna have to look at that again. So was any of that, are you able to suss any of that out at this point?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Unfortunately, on the ridership side, we don't have the granularity of the data to really flesh that out. I will say part of the regional bus study that we're going to be doing will be touching on this. And I know that we also have been working with WMATA, who have a pretty rich data repository that we're hoping to leverage a little bit more to try and better understand that. We can definitely get that more from the service side, how service has changed from a very granular level because of the scheduled data that's available by all agencies now. DLT is actually being really helpful here in making that available across the state. And so that is something that from the service side, we have got that at a really granular level. It's just unfortunately for the Rogers side right now, it's at the agency level in most cases. But we are definitely working with our partners in the region. Hopefully we'll improve the data communication and hopefully get more of that data over time, because I would love to be able to answer those questions. I would love to get my hands on that kind of data.
If I'm remembering my last VRE meeting correctly, I think we're about to have an incredible opportunity to mine some real data with, I think both WMATA and VRE are gonna go fare free for it's like a month, 6 weeks, something like that, and I'm sure Mr. Dalton will talk about that. We could get incredible data, I think, and also hopefully attract people to try writing who would think, well, this is pretty good. Anyway, I assume you're on it. I see the head nods. That's great. I'm looking forward to another really fascinating report. And I think Mr. Walkinshaw is correct. I mean, the more you can find out, what stations are they getting on? Where are they going? And hopefully, maybe we'll do something. If you fill out this questionnaire on your ride and you get a free ride, maybe some other ways to get some data. But thank you. This is great. And I'm looking forward to more. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to one second, Mr. Harmony and Ms. Spiliotopoulos. Now, we're moving on to the Vision Route 7.
We have a written report update on Route 7, and I'll touch on a little bit on the air.
Gotcha. Okay. On that note, moving on to item 8, then the transit technology program.
So again, yeah, so we have a written update on status of regional fare collection as well as our zero emission regional cost working group in your written materials. So no presentation. And likewise for commuter choice.
Any questions?
Send them in writing.
All right. If you have questions after reading the report, contact Kate. Otherwise, we'll get a fuller report later on. Okay, so moving on to our legislative update. Ms. Mattice, I understand that Amy's not available, but if you wouldn't mind giving us a quick assembly wrap up and any TISDAC information.
I'm happy to do so. And so in fact, Amy just sent me some notes. She is down for the furthest point you can go in Virginia. She's down in Bristol this evening and wasn't able to connect with us, but she did want me to report out that, as you know, on June 17th, the General Assembly came back to vote on the governor's 30+ amendments, including yet another attempt at suspending the gas tax for the summer and capping the increase in indexing the gas tax at 2%. And as expected, the amendment was approved by the House of Delegates and then defeated in the Senate on a 21-18 vote, which included one Republican, Emmett Hanger, with one Democrat out of the country. And obviously, I think, as you know, NVTC's been working continuously on a broad coalition to help defeat the amendment. That's something we did in the general as well as back in the special session. And then the General Assembly did adjourn until September 7th, when they're expected to return to vote to appoint a state corporation commission judge. So those are the remarks from Amy, and I'm happy to transition. So please, we obviously have a senator here. So if folks have questions for you, but I don't have necessarily the ability to answer a lot of the questions on general.
If it's easy, I'll take it now. If it's hard, we'll wait till Senator.
I just had a quick question. Obviously, we wrote a letter in opposition to the governor's gas tax plan, but then subsequently President Biden called for a suspension of the gas tax. Does that have any net impact on any of our operational activities with the federal, if a proposed federal suspension?
So the federal suspension, that funds the Federal Transit Administration as well as the federal highway. And so mechanically, I don't know exactly what that would be. That's 18.3 cents on every gallon. It's been the same since '93. So that would have an impact on federal highway, which would eventually go to VDOT, and then federal transit, which would be VRE, WMATA, and PRTC in our area.
Federally, they could fill that bucket though, since they have the ability to print money and we don't. So they could certainly fill the bucket if they chose.
So I'm happy to give an update on TISDAC, which is the Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee. And that's something that I serve on as representing the Virginia Transit Association.
Kate, can I say one quick thing on that? The September one, there's rumors I've heard, and I can say that I don't think there's any basis to it, that there's more to the session in September than just the SCC appointment. Frankly, we made deals on the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals. We could come to an agreement on the SCC, so we put it off till then. But we usually will also appoint any judgeships that come open as they normally do during that time. I'm sure we'll reach an agreement on this, but there's no other crazy things we're looking at doing. We've probably done enough damage this year.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Mr. Matthews.
So indeed, the Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee, or known as TISDAC, we're continuing to provide feedback to DRPT. They have a sort of a triennial review of their process for allocating capital and operating funding, as well as defining transit state agency strategic plans. And again, just scope of this is about all of our bus systems and VRE. It is not about WMATA. And again, I serve on the body as a representative of Virginia Transit Association. One of the other things I do is I actually have a very active group of jurisdictional staff. So anytime the materials come in, which is about a week ahead of time, we actually convene. Sophie helps me convene a regional body to review, and they can provide me comments. And so we actually have a very active group within the jurisdiction. So your jurisdictions are looking at these things because this affects their own transit system funding as well as their contributions to VRE. And so to date, DRPT has presented several refinements to the transit strategic plan guidelines, and as well as updates to its capital program. They call it the Merit Program. And again, working very closely with jurisdictions. Really, none of the proposals that DRPT has put in those spaces are considered to be controversial, and they're planning to continue to move forward. I'll talk a little bit about more of the approval process in a minute. But DRPT is still in the process of reviewing and refining potential changes to the operating assistance program. And for this program, they are required by law and do have a performance-based funding model. And it seeks to allocate transit funding based upon a number of different measures, which also includes ridership. And the challenge to date, and no surprise, is that when you use something that's very much based on ridership, and we're talking about data for the last couple of years, those systems that have seen huge reductions in ridership, especially with commuters in our area, VRE and Loudoun County Transit in particular, they would see a potential reduction in the formula allocation approaches that DRPT has been working with. However, many of the other NVTC systems seem to be seeing a potential increase. So there's not necessarily a regional cohesion when it comes to this. And so DRPT is continuing to refine. They actually delayed the next TISDAC meeting to continue to look at opportunities and options. They do need to stick to a performance-based model. They do have a great deal of interest by the administration to demonstrate that the funding is being allocated in a performance way. So I know there's a lot of conversations about how they can continue with this formula and maybe find something to handle some of the losses that some of these transit agencies are seeing. So there's definitely more work going on. We do have our next meeting on July 29th. And what I wanted to bring back is there's opportunity for public comment at any of the meetings. But once DRPT has prepared a proposal, which does get approval by the CTV, they will be opening it up also for public comment. So there's a number of different opportunities. So both through me at the meeting, public comment that can be provided, as well as before it goes to CTV. So stay tuned again. The transit agencies, in particular VRE and Loudoun County Transit, are watching this very closely. But just understand it's a zero-sum game. So with one gets more, then others get taken away. So it's definitely a difficult spot. And I'm happy to answer questions about TISDAC.
Actually, do you want to go ahead and do the federal?
Yep. So just very quickly on the federal, we are incredibly pleased to hear from both Congressman Beyer and Congressman Connolly that in late June, the Route 7 BRT earmark has been forwarded to the Full Transportation Appropriations Committee for consideration. This would be a $2 million earmark that would allow NVTC to complete all the planning and the environmental work for the Route 7 BRT. There's obviously a lot more to come as it works through appropriations process. I thank all of you, your jurisdictions for support in this. And obviously, if you see these two members of Congress, please continue to show your support for this earmark as it moves forward.
Thank you, Ms. Mattias. Any questions on TISDAC or the federal update? All right. Let's go ahead and move on to our next item, which will be the Virginia Railway Express. And I guess we could say it's our youngest member celebrating 30 years. So still a youngster at the commission.
But we don't look a day over 29.
Welcome, Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, Chair.
And please, whenever you're ready.
Well, thank you, Chair Gary, commission members and others. Got a couple of things to do tonight. Let me just, you do have a CEO report in your package. Let me do just a couple of updates and then we can get to the action items, and I believe we have a closed session on here, and then I can answer any questions as they come about. So first of all, I do want to note that on June 22nd, the commissions and operations board members, both past and present, elected officials from the region, staff, stakeholders, and the public celebrated the 30th anniversary of the start of VRE service, which was June 22nd of 1992. We did this at the Manassas station. I just want to thank commission members that were present for that event, and were also able to take a short train ride with us that day. I also want to state, I believe most of you have received this invitation, but after our July 15th operations board meeting, there will be a reception at the transit facility there at PRTC, once again to celebrate the 30th anniversary, and of course you're all invited. The other note I wanted to make is that as you've heard, we've had several conversations over the last couple of years as it relates to the public bond sale. So on June 28th, we did close on the public bond sale. The net proceeds of $119.2 million. Of course, this will go to support the Commonwealth's purchase of the right-of-way for CSX and provide the ability for VRE to operate perpetuity. So quickly, on-time performance for June was up significantly from May at 87%. And then ridership, again, still clawing our way back up, but the month of June, and this is unaudited, but was the highest monthly ridership since February of 2020 at just over 110,000 riders. So with that, that is my brief report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dalton. And I'm going to kick it over to Mr. Walkinshaw for a couple of other items.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. The first action item is action item 11B, and the Commission's being asked to approve resolution 2482, which will authorize the chief executive officer to execute an amendment to the Amtrak access and storage agreement to reflect adding the future VRE Crystal City Station to the list of joint use facilities and update the list of eligible Amtrak trains for the Cross Honor program. The action will allow Amtrak trains to utilize the future VRE Crystal City Station. Acknowledging this now allows for VRE and Amtrak to formally work collaboratively to ensure the needs of both VRE and Amtrak are met as the final design process continues. Mr. Chairman, I'll move approval of resolution 2482.
So moved. Second.
Got a motion from Mr. Walkinshaw, a second from Mr. Evans. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
1, 2, 3 hands, all virtual. I'll check Ms. Bagley and Ms. Kilroy. Wonderful, passes unanimously. Mr. Walkinshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Action item 11C, the commission is being asked to approve resolution 2483, which will authorize the chief executive officer to execute 2 agreements with the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, specifically a master funding agreement for VPRA supplied funding for VRE projects, and a master funding agreement for VPRA track access elective contributions for VRE track access fees. I move approval of resolution 2483.
Second. I have a motion from Mr. Walkinshaw, second from Mr. Skiles. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye. And I got a hand from Ms. Bagley, Ms. Gilroy, and Ms. Palchik, all in favor. So passes unanimously. Thank you. And we're going to kick 11D over to Mr. Walkinshaw as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And 11D is an information item, and Ms. Garvey previewed it for us, but VRE is considering a free fare initiative. And I think one thing it's important to just kind of note from the outset, different systems and jurisdictions have gone free fare or looking at free fare in a permanent perhaps sense. That's not what we're talking about at VRE. But in July, the operations board will consider two related free fare proposals. The first is a free fare September for all riders. So September is typically a month when the transportation system is strained. Kids are returning from school. Workers return from summer vacation. Obviously, we're hoping that we see a significant return to work in the federal government in September. And staff thinks that offering free fares for that month will encourage commuters who are looking at different commuting options to try VRE. Also a way for us to thank the riders who have stuck with us and kept riding through the pandemic, which is thousands of them. And obviously, as we discussed in detail earlier, in September, WMATA will shut down Metro Rail stations south of National Airport on the blue yellow lines, lasting for at least 6 weeks. And VRE is a major part of that mitigation effort. So we see the free fare September as a way to help in that effort. And also celebrate the 30th anniversary, as has been mentioned, and attract new riders to VRE. Related proposal will be free fares from zones 2 and 3 for October. And zones 2 and 3 would be the Crystal City and Alexandria stations and the Backlick and Franconia Springfield stations into zone 1, Lafont and Union stations during October, given that the shutdown of Metro Rail's blue and yellow line service south of National Airport will continue for those 3 weeks into October. So again, we're hopeful that we can do our share in the mitigation effort, but also use it as an opportunity to market VRE and promote VRE and attract new riders. I think one of the things that we know is that when people try VRE, they love it. They enjoy the experience and the service that they get. So we're hopeful that that this can be a way to bring new folks into the system. So the operations board will be formally considering the free fare programs at our July meeting. I don't want to get ahead of the operations board, but based on the conversations that we've had, I think there's enthusiasm. Mr. Dalton is here to answer any questions folks might have about it.
Oh, I for one am excited. I know I have to be a TPB, so I'll definitely be trying to take advantage of September and October. That way I don't have to transfer. I just get on at the King Street Metro Station and get off at Union Station. So I'm looking forward to it, but
And the timing couldn't be better. People will need alternatives.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah, and just the only thing I would add, if we were talking earlier about the communications effort around the shutdown, and assuming that we move forward with this, hopefully NVTC and Metro VRE free fares part of the communication for riders to deal with those shutdowns.
Any, Mr. Snyder?
Question, beyond giving away fares, is VRE looking at business model changes, that is not relying purely on commuters that aren't commuting anymore?
Yes, absolutely. We've had a lot of conversations around transforming rail in Virginia and the Long Bridge project, and the opportunities that will come from the action we took at last month's meeting here in terms of getting control of the right of way and tracks, which will allow us to expand service. So will allow us to offer weekend service, will allow us to offer service later into the evening. So as ridership continues to return, I've been one saying that our pre-pandemic ridership base isn't going to get us back to the 20,000 trips a day that we had pre-pandemic. So we've got to go out and find new riders. Those are probably going to be riders that need a schedule that's more flexible than the traditional 9 to 5. So the good news is transforming rail in Virginia is going to give us the tools to be able to offer that to riders.
Any other questions or comments for VRE? Well, thank you, Mr. Webb. Sure. As always, thank you, Mr. Dawson.
Thank you.
All right. Looks like we're on item number 12, which is our Department of Rail and Public Transportation. Mr. Brule, are you still with us? It looks like you're in a steady position too.
Good evening from Blacksburg. Just a couple of updates from DRPT. We are slightly younger than the Virginia Railway Express. We celebrated our 30th birthday on July 1st as a separate standalone state agency in transportation. So as we celebrate our 30th anniversary, we've got a lot of fun things planned for the year ahead. So we launched a brand new website. So take a look. It's very modern and really updates what we had in place for a number of years. So focused on being transparent and having more data and information available to the Commonwealth. We also have new branding, very colorful. So it's a fresh, modern look for DRPT as we turn 30 and are really excited to share that time with you guys. A couple of other things that I wanted to mention on the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority and Amtrak front. We did go to financial close with Norfolk Southern. So we have secured the rail property and projects associated with the Western Rail Initiative. Along with that, we have the opportunity to expand some service. And on Monday, we will launch the second daily train to Roanoke, the third daily train to Norfolk, and we'll be restoring some service in Newport News that has been suspended due to some workforce shortages. So Monday and Tuesday next week will be very big days for the Passenger Rail Authority and for Amtrak as we have more service coming into the Commonwealth out of the Northeast Corridor. That'll start with an event on Monday morning, very early, 7:30 in Alexandria, and pick up later in the day on Monday in Roanoke and on Tuesday in Norfolk. So exciting things on the rail front as well. And I will conclude my report with that because we have a very brief briefing for you tonight as well on the transit equity and modernization study.
Hey, really fast. Any questions for Mr. Brule? And I'll just make a quick comment. I missed that Roanoke train because I had to catch the one coming out of there at 6 a.m., but I'll be looking forward to catching the later train next time.
It'll be a later in the day train for you for your next trip to Roanoke.
Thank you, Mr. Brule. So 12B, we have our transit equity and modernization study presentation. Acting DRPT Chief of Public Transportation, Grant Sparks, is joining us remotely to give us a presentation on the findings of the transit equity and modernization study. This is an effort that DRPT has been working on for the past several years that is focused on identifying opportunities to advance equitable transit within the Commonwealth, looking at the advancement of equity, accessibility, and technology. There are accompanying slides up on the screen and also a copy at Commissioner's tables to follow along with. So Mr. Sparks, welcome.
Great. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Well, good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Grant Sparks, and I'm the Acting Chief of Public Transportation for the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation. Thank you for inviting me to provide the Commission with a final briefing on the House Joint Resolution 542 of Virginia Transit Equity and Modernization Study. This statewide study has been under development for a year now, and we're excited to be finally wrapping things up and refocusing our efforts on implementing some of the recommendations coming out of the study. Next slide, please. So I'm aware that the Commission was briefed on the study months ago, but I did want to provide a quick refresher on why we're doing this study and highlight some of the key milestones, House Joint Resolution 542 was developed during the 2021 General Assembly session, and the legislation requires DRPT to prepare a study that looks at a variety of different transit topics and develop recommendations for advancing transit equity and modernization efforts in the Commonwealth. Those specific topics are on the screen, and they include transit accessibility, adequacy of transit infrastructure, transit electrification, emerging technologies in transit, transit safety, and transit system engagement and governance. While HJ 542 was intended to be a statewide effort, the resolution had some specific language that omitted WMATA's services from being included in the study's assessments and analyses. So I just wanted to point that one out for you all. And then as for the key milestones and the timeline, we kicked the study off in July of last year. We have submitted an interim study report to the General Assembly, which was done this past December. And we intend on submitting a final report to the General Assembly next month. Both that interim study report and the final study report deadlines were also specifically identified in the House Joint Resolution. Next slide. So the scope of the study was quite broad in terms of the topics covered and the geographic reach being a statewide study. So we tried to focus our time and resources on identifying key needs from our transit agencies and their riders and develop an action plan to address those needs. So this slide here summarizes some of those key activities that were completed as part of that effort. I won't go through each of these. I guess just to highlight a few of them. We conducted a transit agency or multiple transit agency surveys to collect data and understand needs from our agencies. We also conducted 7 rider focus groups to hear directly from transit users. We completed a baseline conditions assessment, which is a 250-page document, a very technical document that outlines the state of transit in Virginia with respect to the various studied topics. I'll briefly stop and mention that baseline conditions assessment, if anyone is interested in looking at it, it is available on the study website, which is vatransitmodernization.com, and the rest of our study resources are available on that website as well. And then also, we had 2 main groups who helped advise the development of the study. The first being the Transit Equity and Modernization Committee, or the TEMC, which included 12 transit agency executives in Virginia. This group met 4 times throughout the study development process. And then we also had technical working groups for each of the study topics, which also met 4 times. And these groups were much larger, had way more participants, and included subject matter experts from transit agency staff across the Commonwealth. So that's just a high level overview of what we've done to date. But in terms of what's left to do, we really only have one final deliverable, and that's the submission of the final study report, which is currently under final review. Next slide. So in the interim study report, we laid out some of the key findings that were identified through our various outreach efforts and analyses. This is not a comprehensive list. These are just some of the highlights. Starting with the adequacy of transit infrastructure, we found that basic transit infrastructure, which we defined as shelters, benches, and lighting, is generally insufficient statewide. Also, many bus stops are poorly placed and not well connected to sidewalks. For the accessibility topic area, we found that the availability of transit in Virginia is generally high, so coverage is pretty good, but of course, gaps do exist. The one thing to note here was that those gaps in our analyses, we did not find the gaps to be disproportionately located in areas where there are vulnerable populations, which we found to be a good thing. There is also increasing interest from our transit agencies in piloting zero fare services to overcome the barriers to transit accessibility. And also more and better data is needed to make well-informed decisions. We found that generally there was a lot of room for improvement when it comes to data that's collected by our transit agencies, as well as the quality of that data. For transit electrification, there is significant interest from our agencies to electrify fleets and adopt newer transit technologies, but additional resources are required, and not just funding, which is the obvious one, but also training and workforce development, as well as best practices in coordinating with utility providers. And then for the system engagement topic, some transit riders have limited opportunities to be part of the decision-making process. We heard that through our rider focus groups. And then also most transit agencies do not have rider advisory boards or committees. I believe only 30% of transit agencies in Virginia have such bodies to advise the policy board. Next slide. So my last slide here, this is just a very high level summary of the study action plan. Again, we do plan on submitting all of our materials next month to the General Assembly. So I've tried to boil everything down here into one slide, but we do have dozens of actions listed in our resources on our website. So just to kind of go through these one by one, starting at the top, we have a recommendation for DRPT to develop technical guidance on bus stop design elements, stakeholder coordination, permitting, and installation. We heard through our outreach efforts that the permitting process alone can be a significant hindrance for our transit agencies to install bus shelters. So that's where that one comes from. In the same vein, on bus stop improvements, there's also a recommendation to update DRPT's merit capital scoring criteria and methodology to further incentivize improvements to bus stop infrastructure. Kate mentioned this a little bit earlier, our work with TISDAC and kind of revising the merit capital scoring criteria. So that is one of the things that we are looking at as part of that process. There's also a recommendation for DRPT to develop technical guidance for monitoring and reporting on infrastructure performance and condition. This one gets at the need for better data to make well-informed decisions. For transit electrification, there's interest in the establishment of statewide zero emission goals and the development of a plan to address those goals. For this, we've already started scoping what that plan or study might look like, and DRPT does intend on launching that statewide effort shortly after this study concludes. There was significant interest from our transit agencies to understand what technologies our various agencies have deployed in the Commonwealth. So there's a recommendation to implement recurring assessments of transit technologies. Another recommendation that's working its way through the TISDAC process that Kate mentioned is for our transit strategic plan guidelines. Here we're recommending to provide strategies in those guidelines for enhanced and more inclusive public engagement. And then the last one here on this list to highlight would actually fall on the transit agencies to implement. And this is to organize or create more transit rider advisory councils within the various transit agencies to advise policy boards on rider perspectives, concerns, and key issues. So again, I would strongly encourage all of you to go to the study website. This is just a very high level summary, and you can actually flip to the last slide, which shows the study website if anyone's interested in getting more information. So I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Any questions for Mr. Sparks? Mr. Stork?
They look at frequency of service and that is obviously a factor in utilization as well. The bus stop you mentioned is.
Could you repeat the question?
The frequency of service as a factor in, you identify a bus stop and design and a number of other things, but did you address that or look at that at all as an issue?
Sorry, everyone. My Bluetooth headset just died on me. I think the question was regarding frequency of service and looking that in our analyses. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So in the accessibility topic area, we did factor in frequency of service just to see what the different frequencies were across the Commonwealth. And so a lot of the maps that we produce and analyses do include that when it comes to looking at accessibility and travel times.
Make any recommendations, or do you have any, I mean, you have, obviously, for some of these, you have some recommendation. I just moved forward.
Yeah, I mean, no specific recommendations for frequency of service. I mean, I think we leave that generally up to the transit agencies to determine how to, utilize their resources based on agency goals. You all are probably aware of the debate between coverage-based transit services and frequency-based transit services. There's certainly an argument for both. We did not take a stand on one or the other in this study.
Any other questions?
Question on the try to be loud enough here, on the insufficient infrastructure, does that include like the condition of existing structures? I know I've seen some that are not in great shape, but did you include that as well as, or could you differentiate that between the need for more?
Yeah, so that's a good question. As part of this process, one of the things that we did, there are over 15,000 bus stops in Virginia. And so to get an idea of what the current condition of the bus stops are was a big challenge for us. We were able to leverage some technology and did a sample assessment of bus stops across the Commonwealth. And our staff looked at over 700 bus stops and looked specifically at the quality of the bus stops, as well as whether or not those bus stops had any transit amenities such as bus shelters, benches, and lighting. The good news was just in terms of the quality of the bus stops, we were actually a little bit surprised that the quality was generally pretty good. And that conflicted a little bit with the information that we received through our rider focus groups, as well as our transit agency survey. Riders and transit agencies generally think that their stops aren't in great condition, but in our assessment, we found that not to be overly consistent. And it does vary by geography, and certainly in more urban areas, the stops are in much better condition. As you get further outside of the central business district and the urban core, the quality of bus stops certainly start to degrade.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Sparks? Well, Mr. Sparks, thanks so much for hanging in there with us for late night, and thank you for the report. Any questions, we know where to turn.
Thank you for having me.
We're gonna go ahead and turn back over to Ms. Mattice for our executive director report.
Thank you. And one of the things that we did this month was actually print out a copy for all of you of our latest newsletter, which I have to say, I think we have a very familiar face to this commission on the board. So this is actually Sharon Bulova from the 30th anniversary of VREs. We got some wonderful pictures in here. So I do definitely recommend taking a look at our newsletter. It's chock full of information, a lot of things both NVTC staff as well as our regional folks have been working on. And so I did want to take the opportunity, you've heard an awful lot about our marketing campaign that we have going on right now. Maybe you've even heard or seen the marketing campaign. So I wanted Matt Friedman to give us an overview and maybe even show us a little preview of what's out there and tell us what the data that we're seeing so far. So Matt, if you can go ahead.
Sure. Good evening, folks. We are going to keep this very brief. I know it's late, but I'll give you a quick high-level version of what's going on. We are now in week 6 of about a 3-month campaign, and we are already seeing some amazing numbers, which I will talk about. Just as a quick reminder, the campaign can be seen and heard on radio stations WTOP, WAMU, and WLZL WLZL El Zol. It's on audio and video streaming services. It's on online and social media ads. We're doing ads on Waze for the first time. We're doing email marketing for the first time. And this is our third marketing campaign overall since 2019. It is also our first to include some Spanish language advertising. And we do have a quick sample. I promise this is just a minute. And if Tenley, you can press play there.
Northern Virginia's public transportation providers know there's a lot to consider as you head back to work, school, and anywhere else. For the past 2 years, we've worked hard to make your ride as safe as possible by making changes that put your health first. As you think about getting back on board, you can trust we're taking care of the big things. So you can just relax and enjoy the ride. Rediscover your ride at novarides.org.
Los proveedores de transporte público del norte de Virginia saben que hay muchas cosas que considerar cuando vuelva al trabajo, a la escuela o a cualquier otro lugar. Durante los últimos 2 años, los proveedores de transporte público locales han puesto su salud por delante y han trabajado mucho para que su viaje sea lo más seguro posible. Cuando piense en volver a bordo, puede estar seguro de que estamos ocupándonos de todo para que usted pueda relajarse y disfrutar del viaje. Redescubra su viaje en novarides.org.
And as those ads show you, we are once again encouraging people to visit novarides.org. It includes a lot of things, including a trip planner from Move It, links to all of the Northern Virginia transit providers, and the numbers are astounding so far. As of yesterday, novarides.org had over 20,000 page visits in about 6 weeks. About 6,000 of those are to a dedicated Spanish tab. And that is already 93% more visitors than we had an entire campaign last year. So we are gangbusters so far this year, and we still have about 2.5 months to go on this campaign. Starting to get a little bit of other data as well. We just got some data today. Twitter, we are seeing a 10% engagement rate. That is the number of times someone clicks, likes, retweets. 1% is considered great. We are 10 times higher than that right now. Another part of the campaign is online display ads. With those, we are seeing a high number of people clicking to novarides.org. The so-called click-through rate right now is at 0.26. That is about three times the industry average. The Spanish language is actually performing even greater at 0.29%. So we're real excited about that. We, of course, will continue to analyze the performance and summarize these results as we get them. And of course, I do want to remind everybody the campaign is made possible with a grant from DRPT, a local match from the cities of Alexandria, Falls Church, and Fairfax, counties of Arlington, Fairfax, and Loudoun, as well as OmniRide and VRE. So it's quite a partnership that we have together. And as Ronetta mentioned earlier, we are in the early stages of planning for yet another campaign in 2023 after the Yellow Line Bridge and tunnel work. And we will be using the lessons of this campaign and our previous 2 campaigns to inform what we do then. So thank you.
Wow. I mean, when you talk about 3 times the industry average, 10 times, what's considered great, yeah, blown away. That is awesome. Any questions or comments on the ad campaign? Keep it up.
And so that was great because it's always tough to give stuff at the end, but I wanted some really good news. So just getting back to administrative business, we do have a WMATA committee meeting on July 21st at 6 p.m. I believe that's upstairs. There's no August committee meeting or commission meeting. So you can enjoy your break until September 1st, when we'll be meeting back here again. And just a heads up, I know scheduling is really hard, but we do need to schedule committee meetings starting the fall. Legislative and policy, we have a joint commission working group for 395 and 95. We do that joint with PRTC. And of course, the WMATA committee again meeting in October. So there will be some scheduling things that your staff will be helping us figure out. Obviously, we do have the financial reports included in your materials, and Scott's available always to answer those questions. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Ms. Mattice. Any questions or comments from Ms. Mattice before we go into closed session? All right. So we do have closed session for the benefit of the listening public. We plan to return to open session a little afterwards. The YouTube feed will continue when it's muted, and a screen notice stating that we are in closed session. The meeting will resume live when we return to open session. In case of technical difficulties and the live feed is interrupted, viewers should check our YouTube channel for a new feed. Can I have a motion to go into closed session?
Second.
All right, motion by, was that Mr. Stiles? And a second by Mr. Evans. All right. And just for the record, let me read out the motion that we're going through. Pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, section 2.2-3711A3 of the Code of Virginia, I move that the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission convene a closed meeting for discussion of one matter concerning the acquisition of real property for public purposes, including rail operations, rail equipment storage, and commuter parking. The discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position and negotiating strategy of the commission. All right, and just for purposes of the motion on the second, all those in favor? Aye. Great, so you guys mind giving us the room? Voice recorders and
Jump in.
It should be very brief. Yeah, it should be very. Oh, okay. These are the worst. They're bad. We sit in a lot of seats in this job.
You know, I've never seen this.
Sometimes.
Data center. It's all data center. Yeah. So I have a road project, total value of 75 million. Because we're going through.
Sorry about that. I said it out loud.
We need them to look. We're not even allowed by law.
Good to go, Melissa? I'm just making sure that we're live. I think we are.
So we're live? 1 second.
Okay, so we are back in open session. Welcome back to the public and staff listening via YouTube live stream. So I'm gonna read this motion out real fast. It's a motion for certification. The Northern Virginia Transportation Commission certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge and with no individual member dissenting at the just concluded closed session, 1, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under the Freedom of Information Act were discussed. And 2, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed session was convened were heard, discussed, or considered. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second. Mr. Ferranti, second by Mr. Eben. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We are
I
certified.
need to read.
Ayes from the virtual, hand from Ms. Palchak, hand from Ms. Gilroy, hand from Ms. Bagley. Thank you very much. And then now we have to have the resolution 2484.
I would move resolution 2484. You don't need to state the purpose. It's on, we have it in the record, right?
Second. Correct. And second from Mr. Alcorn. So motion by Mr. Eben, second by Mr. Alcorn. Any further discussion by the commission? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And hand from Ms. Palchak, hand from Ms. Gilroy, hand from Ms. Bagley. Motion passes unanimously. I've gotten us out of here a couple of times at 8:30. You knew there was gonna be one tonight. So that's it for tonight. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Appreciate it.